my pride. You need. I feel so good. I feel so good. Ooh, baby.
Alrighty, we might kick off while people are still arriving. So good morning, my name is Emma Greenhalgh. I'm the CEO of National Shelter. I'm delighted to welcome you here today. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people here in Meanjin, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us today, joining us online, and any other First Nations people. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This session's being streamed and recorded and will be available for delegates to view after the conference. Today we will be taking questions both online and from the room. So for those of us who are joining us online, please use the Q&A tab at the right of your screen. You will also find a copy of any presentations in the handout section, again on the right-hand side of the screen. For those in the room, if you wish to ask a question, we ask that you keep your questions succinct to enable us to get through as many as possible. Before I introduce today's presenters, I would like to acknowledge the people who have lived experience of housing vulnerability, who are at the conference either as presenters or delegates. Your voice is important in the shaping of better housing outcomes for the future. Now towards today's session, towards better renting experiences. So the experience of renting in Australia has been under a particular pressure in recent years, with growing numbers of people experiencing difficulty in finding and keeping a home. Technological advancement in the renting sector has often been predominantly about commercial uses, and these come with potential benefits, alongside risks to renters arising from different priorities, and have often placed new pressures on renters. With less fanfare, housing workers and activists have often been early adopters of new technologies. So this is from early phone connections in the early 20th century to websites in the 90s. And these tools have been aimed to ease the pressure on renters through expanding access to information and supports. In this session, we want to explore how recent tools have been used by people in the community and in the government sector to amplify voices, create connections, and support the needs of renters. So just in terms of the format, each speaker will present for 10 minutes. We'll have some facilitated questions, and then we will open up to questions from the audience and discussion. So our three presenters today are Alyce Holmes from Common Equity Housing Limited, Jennifer Beveridge of the Tenants Union of Victoria, and Samantha Watson from the Residential Tenancies Authority here in Queensland. You'll find their detailed bios in the conference portal, so I won't go through them here. So in terms of the order for today, we'll start off with Samantha, and then we'll move through to Jennifer, and then we'll go on to Alyce. So I'd like to welcome Samantha up to provide the first presentation.
Thank you for the lovely welcome to country, Emma. Good morning, my name's Samantha Watson. I'm the Chief Customer Experience Officer at the Residential Tenancies Authority. My very short segment, I feel like I have so much to say, is around how the RTA is undertaking transformation of its service delivery model, its tech stack, all our digital platforms, and what we've done to inform that in terms of understanding the Queensland rental community. So a little bit about us. We heard from Mark before. So we are an independent statutory authority in Queensland. We are responsible to the Minister, and we play a pivotal role in administering the Residential Tenancies and Rooming Accommodation Act. What do? So we obviously administer the rental laws. We implement law changes, which we've seen in Queensland recently. We administer the rental bonds in Queensland. We offer support to the whole sector via a number of different customer channels. We do education and stakeholder activities. We have a free and quite mature dispute resolution service in Queensland. We do compliance and enforcement, and we have specialised support services for the vulnerable community within Queensland. And our vision is really to make renting work for everybody. What is unique about us is that we are supporting the entire sector. So property managers, property owners, tenants, rooming accommodation, international student accommodation, movable dwellings, we support the whole market. This is a little bit of a performance snapshot, but I'm going to talk to this in relevance of our transformation. So when we consider that 33% of homes in Queensland are rental accommodations, it gives us a bit of an insight into understanding the reach and the impact of support services in the private rental community in Queensland. For the RTA, we've done 129 stakeholder and education activities this year, and we actually hold over $1.1 billion worth of bonds. Our dispute resolution team conducted in the last financial year 22,000 free dispute resolution activities where we actually assisted those parties to self-resolve and stay out of the QCAT system in over 76% of cases. Our call centre took over 340,000 phone calls, 3.7 million visits to our website, so that's our largest strategic touch point for our customers. And 70%, just over 70% of all our forms submitted digitally, 764 alleged offences investigated. Now, what I want to say about this in relation to our transformation journey is that it is critical to understand not only the services that you provide today, but how the landscape looks in terms of changes in the future, and deeply understanding your customers' needs before you decide to go on that journey. I've come from global sectors, private, not-for-profit sectors, and done transformation, and see the challenges that are created when businesses define their digital solutions and their tech stacks without understanding the diversity and the needs of their customers. So we actually conducted a massive research piece last year for 6 months where we took the chance to deeply understand all of our varied customers groups, vulnerable groups, our Aboriginal environment, our DFE environment, our multicultural environment, our disability environment, because whilst our customers are telling us they want digital first, we absolutely cannot take our eye off the ball for our vulnerable customers in terms of accessibility and what they need from us to help them support and navigate their rental journey in the private sector. Sorry, I've just got my clicker. So our research, a little bit of a snippet on our research. I've been with the RTA for 3 years. We've done a lot of work in terms of observing and measuring within our own business, and it felt like to us in our transformation we had all the puzzle pieces and they were all there in front of us, but the research really validated the assumptions and the observations we were making and really brought together that story in a fabric that garnered the investment of the board for us to go on this transformation journey. When we actually consulted all of our stakeholders in the sector in looking at, predominantly because of the size of the investment, our technical transformation, so that is every piece of tech stack that we have in the RTA to administer the $1.1 million worth of bonds, take the 340,000 phone calls, the hundreds of thousands of emails, the 22,000 dispute resolutions. We actually needed to understand what our customers needed from us. So in terms of our research, diversity was key. I mentioned that, and the groups that I've just mentioned before were just some of our stakeholder groups that we engaged with. We did over 1,600 surveys, face-to-face workshops, digital online workshops, quantitative surveys across property owners, property managers, government agencies, industry bodies and stakeholders. So we really were committed to capturing the diversity in the sector to inform what we needed to know to design our future state. Personally, my takeaway from that research, I've been in CX all my life, but what I took away from this piece of research is that you cannot make an assumption on the needs of your customers without understanding the subset individual needs of the customers' groups. And that's where I'm super passionate about accessibility and making sure that we do absolutely everything we can to define our future for our customers, who are the diverse, amazing population of Queensland as it stands now, and knowing that our domestic and international migration is only putting more pressure on us, that we need to keep that more in mind than ever before. So where did our research point us to? So on the screen, there's examples of some of the channels that we have, that our customers have, that they can access our services. The ones in green are where we're really targeting, but that's not to say that the ones not in green we aren't doing optimisations for. For example, our front counter, we've seen a nearly doubling of traffic in that over the last sort of 2 years. Return of international students, vulnerable customers. So we are doing optimisations in all our channels, but we're really looking at our high volume ones. For example, our contact centre, in terms of our tech stack, is actually making sure that we've got our telephony system integrated with our new CRM, which is integrated with our dispute resolution platform, so that we have one view of the customer and they don't actually have to explain to us their story. We can see that. Website, it's actually accessibility. The breadth of information on there, we're seeing more and more complex and varied questions and needs for information. Web services, email, SMS outbound. When we did our research, our customers gave us feedback that they had a very strong preference for digital channels and services. However, we need to understand that that's not all customers. So in terms of our digital and service model design, we're making sure that we cater to both. So I'll give you a little example. We're using a test and learn philosophy on a lot of the things that we're doing now. We've been using test and learn philosophy for a good 18 months to really explore our opportunities and learn where, once we actually go live with our new systems and our new service model, we've learnt a lot in that period. This is a small example of test and learn using KISS, like keep it simple. So we targeted 39 key customer email correspondence pieces that they receive from us in the life cycle of their, say, bond lodgement to bond refund. Those 39 emails represented over 2 million actual email correspondence to customers. And we wanted to look for a way to simplify the messaging, make it more understandable, easily consumed by the customer, and leaving no confusion for them. This is an example of one that we did. This is our fast track bond email. We used the Flesch-Kincaid model of readability, and we just applied some simple principles. So using a call to action, bolding headings that really need to be called out to the customer, understanding what happens next, empowering them to self-manage, little things like using Queensland time, because we're talking to Queenslanders instead of Australian Eastern Standard Time, calls to action and deadlines, and just using some simple principles. And we engaged with our stakeholders on this. We improved the readability score of this email from 58 to 76, which is a significant improvement. We also make sure that we give customers access if they need to speak to us. So a really simple little example of what we're doing, but in talking to the overall, how all our insights fell out into an overall strategy. The funnel represents how customers enter our business, and whilst they want to go digital first, not all of them, they want an expansion of our digital services. So we're looking to build that with a new CRM platform and a whole heap of add-ons and integrations. We, however, know that customers sometimes either struggle with that from an accessibility point of view, it could be a language, could be a disability point of view. So we have more customer points to self-resolve within those services, but we understand that if they can't access those services, that we will always have a focus on human-to-human interaction via phone, via email, via translation services, whatever they need to be able to transact with us. I was really passionate in doing the research. It's a practice in all businesses to create your personas of your customers. I was really passionate about not doing that. I felt the Queensland community was too diverse to create personas. We actually created a new model where we created personas on their agility and adoption of technology, because that helped us to understand the customers more in terms of creating a transformation. So we developed a customer persona there, and that we could match that back to their preferred targeted channel. So in summary, we landed on 5 guiding principles that support our strategic plan around customer experience. One being a capability that is all about the expertise of our staff and their ability to deal with complex customer needs. Customer experience around our service and channel specific design measures. How do we measure everything that we do and ensure that what we're trying to improve is actually coming to fruition? Our digital stack and a continuous process improvement lens in everything that we do. So in closing, I think my advice for any business that's undergoing it doesn't need to be transformational change, even significant change within your business. Do your research up front to know what you need. Don't underestimate the effort of data and validating the customer and the need for managing change. So I'm looking forward to being on the panel, and I'll hand back to Emma. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll just move straight into Jennifer Beveridge from the Tenants Union Victoria. Thanks.
Do you have the clicker? Thank you. Okay, now I'm organised. Thanks, Emma, and welcome to everyone. I too am looking forward to the discussion that we will have later. But to start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and practice. Today, here in this room, it's the Turrbal and Yarraga people in Brisbane. In Melbourne, where I'm from, it's the Wurundjeri people, and I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where you come from and where you may be viewing this session today. Sovereignty was never ceded. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. We know that approximately 30% of our population rent their home. For Aboriginal people, this increases to just over 50%. Tenants Victoria is the specialist legal service and peak body for our state's renters, who number almost 2 million people. Our vision is for safe, secure and affordable homes for Victorian renters in a fair housing system. It's the, sorry? Sorry. That's it. Founded in 1970s by renters, we aim to continue that legacy and empower all renters and make sure their voices are heard in our advocacy. We work with and for people in private rental, public housing, community housing, caravan parks, rooming houses. Anyone who rents their home is welcome to contact us at Tenants Victoria. We work in partnership with other community legal centres, housing and homeless organisations, an increasing range of community services and others, and strategically with government to inform policy development and enhance service delivery. Our services include information, advice, legal representation, as well as financial counselling and outreach services. We also provide training and secondary consultation to community workers. Every year we directly help people with more than 10,000 legal matters related to their rented housing. And every year there are more than 500,000 unique users to our website. In the last year it was something like 1.3 visits to the website. Increasingly, people are accessing our website for information, but then what we notice that they do is that they call us to check that what they read was in fact, and their interpretation was applicable to them. So despite a number of service innovations and improvements to our systems in the past 4 years, we're still unable to meet that demand for our phone service. We're a small team of 32 staff, and our intake and legal team consists of 11 positions. We estimate that between 50 and 70 people who call us are unable to get through when they try. This is our biggest challenge. Home repairs are the bane of many renters' lives, and if you've ever rented, you'll have first-hand experience of this. In 2019, Consumer Affairs Victoria found that 28% of private renters had unattended maintenance issues. That's unattended maintenance issues, not maintenance issues. In 2021, in Victoria, we had an independent social housing regulation review, and their interim report found maintenance was the top issue for social housing renters. Every year at Tenants Victoria, it's the top issue for us. Last year, 20% of calls to the advice line were about repairs, plus another 5% of calls were related to mould only. In short, we're overwhelmed by demand from renters seeking assistance with repairs, and the impacts are significant. There's a real physical and mental health implication with unmaintained homes. There's an ongoing sense of a lack of agency that renters feel in being able to keep their homes safe and healthy. There's a significant time commitment required to follow up with rental providers, agents, and being available for tradespeople to attend. These are all outside of the control of the renter. There's a real sense of being ignored. And a very real risk of retaliatory action when asking for repairs, such as significant rent increases and notices to vacate. We have hundreds of case studies that I could share with you, but I guess in summary, in our experience, people are reasonable. They don't expect immediate action, but they do want action, and they do want to know that something is happening. And there are a myriad of issues such as no hot water, leaks in the roof, blocked drains, or blocked oven that may take weeks of calls and requests before being attended to. And this is where we find that sometimes just a simple bit of advice to the renter where they can encourage their rental provider to look at the Tenants Vic website, or we help them draft a letter that they send, results in action. But other times people experience significant issues, like the man recently who was without electricity after the neighbour's fuse box blew up. It took 9 weeks before he called Tenants Victoria to assist him with that. Another couple who have had repairs needed since 2020 with no response, and they again started to ask for those repairs to be attended to. Again, no response to that, but a notice for a rent increase of $85 a week. Mould issues mean that bedrooms can't be slept in, showers can't be used because the floor is unstable. So if we look at some data, following on from Sam's point, look to the data and the evidence. The volume of demand has inspired a step change in our service offering. You can see there the graph of the number of repair applications made to VCAT. In March 2021, the legislation changed and a number of repairs were now considered urgent, and that's reflected in the applications to VCAT there. Our website, the pages viewed are 4th highest for repairs. And as I mentioned earlier, the highest number of calls to our advice line are about repairs. Often there's a straightforward process for escalating repairs once the renters know their rights. We've explored various options for developing a more efficient way to help people with their repair issues. In 2021, we trialled a mould clinic. This was a dedicated phone line which directed requests for advice specifically about mould first to our intake team. They were able to provide information and then triage as appropriate into our mould clinic for assistance from one of our lawyers on an appointment basis. The model worked really well, and in 2022 and 2023 we further streamlined the service to help more renters more efficiently. So building on the success and learnings of our winter mould clinics, we wanted to use this prototype model and expand to all repair issues so that people can access the right level of service for their level of need. Using the information from thousands of people who we talk to each year and the data from the hundreds of thousands who access our website each year, we drafted a possible solution. 2 consultants, Paper Giant, a design practice, and Joseph, a legal software developer, helped to develop a renter-centred, interactive and accessible online tool to support renters through their journey from understanding their rights to accessing the options to resolve their issues. We start with information, add a little bit of advice, and then we're able to move on to provide legal assistance. So this model was brought to life by funding from the Victorian Legal Services Board and Commissioner. Stage 1 is now complete, and we're developing the clinic service next. The toolkit complements existing services, and we hope that all repair requests will now be managed through this model. The clinic will provide a higher level of service to people with lower legal capability, while those with higher legal capability will be able to self-help with confidence and convenience. The toolkit was launched softly in late August, and last week on International Tenants Day, we launched the toolkit publicly, so it's hot off the press. We do have a data collection and evaluation model in place, and we will be able to share that in the future. So here's the toolkit, and I would encourage you to have a look at it. It's a pretty simple, easy to access toolkit on our repairs page. In fact, it's all over the landing page and multiple pages because we really do want to direct people first to this toolkit before they pick up the phone and they call us. So the first section, as it's listed there, understand your repair rights. It guides people through the legislation and renters' rights when it comes to repairs. It's interactive, asks questions, provides appropriate responses given the renter's circumstances. For example, depending on when the lease commenced or whether the problem is classified as an urgent repair. If renters are unsure or don't know about their repair rights, this is the place that they should start. The second section helps renters to ask for repairs, and again, working through the process can result in either a letter to the agent or landlord or completion of a formal breach of duty notice. So the first step when people need repairs done is to notify the rental provider in writing, and this helps them to do that. So once they know their rights, then they can ask for the repair to be done. And the final section helps renters complete an application to VCAT. So this is where they've given written notice of the repairs to their rental provider and they're not undertaken. They can escalate it to VCAT. We don't have a dispute resolution service yet in Victoria for these sorts of issues. And so this tool helps people to create the application and get the ball rolling with VCAT. So I encourage you to have a look, follow the prompts and see how what can seem often onerous and complicated, we hope we've turned it into a simple process for people. We've used AI, which was something people were a little concerned about, and combined that with years of practice experience from our work dealing with tens of thousands of repair issues to build this tool. And we look forward to seeing the benefits that brings to renters in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Before we go to Alyce from CEHL, Just a reminder to use the app for those who are online to send through some questions. Please ask plenty or we'll all be sitting in silence for quite a long time.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to this session, and thank you for choosing to come along to this. So my name's Alyce Holmes. I'm the General Manager of Co-op Services at Common Equity Housing Limited at Victoria. As discussions around property development intensify, especially with the HAF on horizon, which I endorse these activities, but it's really crucial to remember that real people live in these properties. Common Equity is committed to ensuring that these spaces are not just houses and not just properties, but true homes where residents have a say in their housing. Today we'll talk about our journey around strengthening member and renter voice. While this is our journey, I want you to take some learnings from us so that you can either start or continue your own journey. It might be a little bit basic what we talk about, but I think it's important to sometimes go back to basics or learn from others as well. So you might be wondering, who is Common Equity? We are based in Victoria. We provide affordable housing and social housing, but with a particular focus around cooperative housing. We operate within 60 out of the 79 local government areas within Victoria. We have 2,000 properties across the state. Some of these are in metro, some are in regional, from Bendigo to Mallacoota to Mildura. So we're across a broad catchment of the state. We have $1.2 billion of properties on our balance sheet. So we partner with cooperatives to deliver an effective, sustainable cooperative housing program. So we provide long-term secure tenure and to over 4,000 people. This is growing as we grow our number of properties as well. We support over 90 cooperatives in Victoria. 25% of our portfolio is actually direct rental and not in a cooperative, and so that's why you'll hear me refer to member and renter at times. Our member and renter median age is 59 and their average tenure is 12. And we have instances of people living in their properties for almost 40 years. This is long term, and I think the average age that we have in the tenure is very much linked to our purpose of providing secure long-term housing. We recently went through an update on our strategic plan, and we really redefined our purpose statement, which was around that we provide appropriate, secure and affordable housing and foster rental housing cooperatives to thrive so that more Victorians can experience the dignity of a home in a community guided by the 7 international cooperative principles. So a lot of people ask, like, what is a co-op and how does it really work? So how it works with Common Equity is that Common Equity owns the properties. We then lease them to the cooperative. The cooperative is an independent business that we work with, and they become the rental provider or landlord where they fulfil their duties under that with tenancy maintenance, and we support them to do that. The co-op is also a shareholder within Common Equity, so they have a vote on what we do and at our AGM. There is also opportunity where co-op members can also sit on our board and have a say in that strategic direction of our program. Under the cooperatives is the co-op member. So the co-op member is the renter as well, and they help support their co-op to fulfil those duties and roles as well with the board of the co-op. There was a talk yesterday, and I hope you all got to it, where it was about rental housing cooperatives and what those outcomes are. And if you didn't get to it, they are launching the results of that research early next year, and I highly recommend you look at it because it actually tells us the data of how cooperatives change people's lives more than other housing options. So, like every organisation, we were impacted by COVID. We had to connect in really different ways, and after COVID, there was real disengagement with our members and our community. People were saying that they didn't feel heard, and like other organisations, we didn't perform to the best of our ability. And there were some good things that came out of COVID, like people using Zoom, learning new technologies to connect, but what we found was that for a variety of reasons, people weren't connecting. and they told us that they felt disengaged. So we did some analysis and we looked at, how are people connecting and how do they want to connect. What we found, and it comes to some of the other research that my peers have done, is that, not everyone wants to connect digitally or on technology for a variety of reasons. It may not be that they have access to it, and that happens in particular areas or with particular cohorts or with anyone. They also have varying literacy levels. So there's different types of language groups or abilities to read or not read. We found that 15% of our renters and members did not have an email, so digital communication is not the way to go with them. 3% of our renters and members did not have a mobile phone, so couldn't access information online or through a mobile or text message. And at any one point, we found that almost 15%, the numbers were incorrect or the people had changed their numbers and didn't let us know. They also said that they wanted more face-to-face engagement. With this sort of lack of connection that we found post-COVID, we found that we do our annual survey, and our survey results said that 48% felt like their views were heard. That's striking. 52% did not feel heard. And so I think with all these issues arising, it really created a way forward for us to look at this, and this is really where our journey begins. So we had Liz Thomas, our Managing Director, come on board, and she is really genuinely committed to hearing the voices of members and doing something about it. Liz recognised that with our results, there was a need for a significant change and shake-up. And during financial year 23, we had over 700 participants throughout Victoria that were involved in some of our dynamic, targeted engagement events. And I think having leadership in the organisations that are committed to listening was instrumental in being able to achieve the results we did through our engagement activities. So throughout the year, we developed some different groundbreaking approaches around renter engagement and a suite of tools and activities that we ran with them. So we had to start somewhere. So where we started was a listening session. So it was really about that meet and greet with the new managing director. And I think something that we did, and I don't know if any of you have done this, but we actually did not set an agenda, which for engagement events is crazy. Normally they're tight agendas. So we were really committed to that deep listening and letting the membership fluidly control that agenda. So we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We were told, watch out for the pitchforks, or people might be causing some disruption. But we trusted that this was the right way forward. So we put together a set of tools that would help us through some of these situations. And so some of the tools that we had were that we had a staff escalation point for particular people who might have wanted to talk about their individual circumstances at the time. We were able to put that staff member and person together to make sure that they had somewhere to tell that story or what they needed to get off their chest. We also had feedback, lots of feedback in two forms. So one was about the event, so that we can capture how that they want to continue to be engaged with. The other type of feedback we committed to was saying, a card that they could write, I have an individual issue that I would like followed up on. And we committed to following up on all of them, and we did. So the other thing we did is when we set the rooms up, we set them in a circular chair setting. There was not a stage and us and them. We really committed to having it as a deep listening and that safe space that people could share. And they did. They felt comfortable. They told us lots of their stories and we listened. The staff were also thoroughly briefed, and this is important because, we all want to jump into solutions, but this was not a solution session. This was about listening. What we heard, and I think it goes to, what Jenna was saying about, my maintenance. My maintenance is a key issue. We were hearing this too. And then we heard some other things. We don't feel heard. That reflects in our survey as well, that they had no impact on decision. So from these listening sessions, we really took out what are some of the great ideas from this. And what we found, and we developed a a program around different engagements. So that was looking at different workshops. We ran 37 workshops across the regions. Like I said, we operate in 60 local government areas in Victoria. We went across to all of them and continue to do so. We got 9 engagement coordinators. They were members, co-op members that led engagement activities. They were trained to do so, and they ended up becoming champions of ours as well. So the other things that we did do is we had hot topics. Because we work with co-ops, they operate as a small business, so we supported them to do so. So we'd run hot topics on insurance, it might have been heating, cooling, succession planning, solar panels, and that was really important that they got some information, and so we continue to do that as well. There was also the member value statement that the engagement coordinators led, and that I'll talk a little bit that in the next insert of the activities that we've done. But moving forward, so it's, while it's lovely to listen and it's great to be open to hear people, but the real story comes when there's action. And that's what we were committed to, that deep action, that we were going to do something about it. So we committed ourselves in different ways. So in our newsletters, we would promote what we heard and what we're doing about it. The other day, I looked back at our initial listening session, and I looked at all what we committed to, and I went, tick, 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 this is fabulous. We've been able to track and make sure that we close out those actions. So our newsletter that we provide to our members is monthly. They also said they wanted it in hard copy. We have now sent that out to them in hard copy with an opt-out option if you want it in email. We also looked at our service delivery and looked at an efficient way, and that the members also wanted us to be in a regional base so that they had not just a generic email to contact, but a name and a person. So personalising the service and structuring our business so that it would meet that. The member value statements as well is something that we use to guide how we do our operations. It gives us how the members want to see their housing, how they want to be treated. So it gives us principles to work with to make sure that we align with those. And we remind ourselves regularly of these statements so that we are aligned with them. Another exciting one that we're still in progress of doing, so we ran a pilot about member and housing plans. So the members have a say in their housing. So this was really critical because, with the HAF on the horizon, we want to know what they want. We don't want to just build something just to build it, but actually genuinely hear what they need in their housing. So we've had, out of the pilot, we've had some great success where we've been able to find opportunities where a home was no longer suitable for someone and they had some willingness, and we're looking at development around that. And particularly with the developments, we have them as a silver level livable design, and that means that these homes are versatile and better meet the needs of their changing needs over their lifetime. So I had to sort of cut it down a bit around what we learned, and this is what I really want to take home for you guys as well around what we learned. So I think, it's also, it sounds all great, and it sounds like it all went smoothly, but let me tell you, it has not been an easy journey. Is everyone happier now? Look, not everyone, but what we've found is we've made progress and we've met some amazing people. We do have people who are happier, and we are continuing to work with those who are still unhappy with our services. Have we made mistakes? Absolutely, but mistakes are okay because we learn from those mistakes, and that is what helps drive us to do better. So what we've learnt, so negotiables, being really clear about your negotiables. Don't negotiate on things that are not negotiable. It will set you up for failure. Having robust ways of engaging, so multiple ways of engaging, like we had with people with different needs, and I think from Sam's presentation around, it's not always technology, sometimes it's in person, sometimes on the phone. Having different ways to engage is important. Closing off your communication loops, so making sure that you respond to things and making sure that loops are closed off in those communications. Creating safe spaces was really important, that people felt that they could be heard and that it was genuine. A stakeholder analysis, and so the research that my peers have done, is it's really important to know who your cohort are. How do they want to be communicated with as well? Tools, as a professional, so you would want to have tools to help you through these engagement activities to make sure it's smooth and that you've got things in your back pocket to help you guide you through some challenging conversations at times. Organisational buy-in, I think everyone knows this, it is so important, not just from executive management, it's also your staff need to have buy-in. And so spruiking that across your organisation, buy-in is so important. Engage early, engage before there's an issue. That's something else that we're finding is we're engaging now before big issues arise so that we can work with people and they feel supported to do that as well, to be worked with. Making events fun and social. It's not all business. Having elements of fun and social within your events is really important. They said that they wanted to connect, feel engaged, network, and we did that, and that has worked tremendously in our events. So we always try and put in something that's a little bit fun, a little bit social. Collaborate. Use people in your programs. They are wonderful people to collaborate with. They become your champions. So I highly recommend finding people in your programs that you can work with that have that will be able to be your champions in the future. And if you develop materials, make sure it's easy to read and accessible for people. Like I said, 15% of our renters did not have emails. Make sure it's accessible for them. There is a tour about cooperatives coming up next year in Europe, so I do highly recommend that you have a look at this. BCCM are running this. Here's the details if you want to, but I will leave you with a final note that technology is the modern day music, and while it plays a vital role, Common Equity understands that not all members dance to its tune. Some prefer face-to-face engagements, and we are here for them. We make sure that no one gets left behind in this digital era. Thank you.
Thank you. Just, these lights are so bright, it's so hard to see people. So we'll move on to questions, and we do have some questions that we've prepared as well, but I just thought I'd put the opportunity out to the audience if there's any burning questions. Yes, we have, I can see Andrew Elvin.
I think it's very interesting that nationally the topic of debate is increasing renters' rights, and I think we're all supportive of that. But I wanted to ask a question about whether there's any evidence from your data about when there's an increase in tenant rights, whether there's a resultant drop-off in, the number of bonds or whatever it might be in terms of investors leaving the market because they're finding the control over the investment product is actually leading to a decrease in rental availability more broadly in your states. So I just wondered whether, the tension between renters' rights equaling departure of investors from the market is a myth or a reality?
Well, I wonder, Samantha, if do you have the data and can you bring that to hand about maybe what's happened with the Queensland rental reforms and how that may have corresponded?
Yeah, so we actually don't play in the space of the investment piece. We're actually there to administer the bond. What I can say that we have seen in terms of increasing complexity and pressure on the market in terms of change is that, and we see this through our dispute resolution service, is that people are maybe becoming a little bit more hesitant to go into a dispute given that the market in terms of the rental stock, because we don't see the investment side of stuff, but the rental stock is so tight. So we are definitely seeing that trend, but it has wavered through in terms of, I think, financial pressures on people being so high at the moment. When they do get into the dispute process and generally around a financial position or repairs of cost or the bond refund is our biggest reason, that they can be more adversarial than they have been as well. So there is definitely some changing trends there around people being with a low rental availability rate of less than 1%. I think I heard it this morning on ABC that people are definitely a little bit more hesitant and do think longer about going into the dispute process.
Is that a comment would you like to add anything, Jennifer, about what you've seen?
No, look, I know that there's been lots of research published on this and there have been studies done that talk to that. again, that's not my area of expertise, so I direct you to those. But I guess what I would challenge is the assumption that primarily the property is for investment. And, you know, from a service user point of view, it's their home. And anybody who provides a service, whether it be a restaurant meal, a train from A to B, is required to ensure that that's fit for purpose. And that's what we see over and over again, that the product that the consumer, if this is how we want to talk about it, is purchasing is not fit for purpose. And it's ridiculous that we still have situations where people can be without hot water or power or a working stove, and that's okay. You know, we're only just getting minimum standards in this country, that none of us would be happy to live in properties that don't maintain that. So that would be my comment. I think we keep putting the investment first rather than the product, if you like, being fit for purpose.
Can I just come in with a question, like when you were speaking, and you know, I think the toolkit's great in terms of how it takes some of the pressure off tenants in terms of, you know, having to go through a stressful process. But you know, just sort of reflecting on, you know, there is still that onus on the tenant to have to make the call and initiate repairs, and, you know, and they might not even get done, you know, and I just was wondering, yeah, what else needs to change, you know, legislatively? Do we need to be, you know, actually making houses not fit for purpose so they can't be rented out? And so, I mean, what needs to change so there's that rebalance in the relationship and repairs and maintenance actually get done?
That's a really good question. And I think some of it, you know, as first pass to answer that question is that we take all of these stories and experiences and collate them and then take them back to government and speak into situations where people do have the opportunity to make improvements. I think what we're seeing in Victoria, we've had the new legislation for 2.5 years now, and you know, there's a challenge with implementing something. Let's acknowledge that I think we still had lockdowns 4, 5 and 6 to go when the new legislation was implemented. So there are challenges to really embedding that in practice. One of the things that we talk to government about is how do we enforce the new legislation, so it's not just on the renter to raise their hand and to ask for things, and certainly that can help in situations where the property's not appropriate at the start of a lease, and we have things in place to ensure that that happens. You know, what audits are being taken, what steps are we taking to regulate that and to enforce that. But the other thing is that hot water services break down, and the renter is the one who knows that. Yeah. So there's always going to be a situation, you know, if you buy a pair of shoes and the heel comes away, it's still on us to do that. So we're not going to be able to eliminate that, but there does need to be a rebalancing.
Yep. I know we do have another question up the back here. Is there a mic? Oh, okay, right at the top.
Yeah, my name's Alan Moll. I'm CEO of Kalana Community Association. It's an Aboriginal organisation in Katherine, the Northern Territory. We're a housing provider. We set up in 1975 for that reason, to get Indigenous people into better housing and housing that meets their needs. And we're only a small organisation as far as our housing program goes. We own 80 houses and a couple of NDIS properties that we purchased to support our people who have the need for NDIS services. Our biggest problem is our rental. Of course, you know, low income earners, and when you have 15 to 20 people living in a house, that house takes a bit of a beating, if you like to say, sometimes with the amount of use that gets throughout the house. It's not so much willful damage, it's more the amount of people living in the house. Our rents are our problem. So 4 generations of families have lived in that house, and collecting the rent from low-income earners and not getting to the need of evictions. Historically, we don't evict because that just creates further problems for us. It creates homelessness, or families then just move to another relative's house, and now you've got 15, now you've got 30 in a house, so it doesn't pay. You just got to keep working with them and try and get that rent back. There must be a system, and I've talked about it, but most of the time I get howled down on it, but there must be some way that we can capture the rent. If it's Centrelink payments, if it's low income earner, you get a Centrelink payment, you get the reduction and all the rest of it, where our mob can't cancel the rental payment, because that's when they put themselves in hardship. If they was living in public housing or social housing with empty housing, they would be evicted, and that creates more problems right across the board. Again, historically, we don't evict our mob, we try and work with them. But if we could capture that rent, so they can't change it unless the Centrelink agency gets a letter from the housing provider saying they no longer live there. If we could do that, that would alleviate some of those problems of, we're collecting the rents, we're showing that we're a good housing provider, we're doing the repairs and maintenance, and our tenants are safe, knowing that they're up with their rental payments.
Yeah. I hear you on that. I don't know whether you might want to make a comment on that.
Yeah, I think you've probably spoken to every community provider here today about those same sorts of issues, so that is a sentiment across the board, and I appreciate those challenges. So I'll speak to what our program and our organisation does. So when we went out to hear the voices of our members and renters, that maintenance issue was a really significant point. So we have recently redone our strategic plan, and that was a particular key focus to addressing it, and it was about modelling, so looking at the financial modelling around making that work. So we had to do scenario based and what we were looking at, thresholds, those sorts of things. So it was complicated, but we just had to look at the modelling and say, where are we going to put our money in, given the rents and how low they can be. So making sure that we use that money efficiently within our budgets and having our board approve those budgets as well. It is still an ongoing issue, I think, for us, but it's something that we're also investing into. There is a tenant and renter responsibility around maintaining it, and I understand that not evicting people, and particularly in different cohorts, that is a real challenge, and there is no, I think, answer or real golden key for that thing, but it is working with those support agencies to help support what you do in housing. You are a landlord or a rental provider, you do have to maintain, you have obligations under your Tenancy Acts in each state that you have to abide by them, but there is a renter responsibility, so how does that happen? I don't have an answer, but I think it is working with support agencies who can support those tenants to help them maintain their tenancy if they need some of that extra support.
Thanks. We do have an online question that I'll go to. So with the varying housing crisis, there's an increase in house sharing, but many of these arrangements are cash in hand, both because Centrelink penalises pensioners for income earned. How do we protect both tenants and landlords in this type of under-the-radar arrangement? Does anyone want to take that one?
I mean, from a community housing provider, we assess everyone who is in the household, so we are generally aware. And as it's a cooperative, there's generally a smaller community and know who's living in those houses. So we don't have strict tools or mechanisms to say that person can't live there, but we do have to assess people on their rents when they live in that property. So that's from our perspective, but I don't know if you have any view around that from regulations or those house sharing.
Do you want to go?
No, you can go.
Oh, look, you know, I think there's definitely, under the Act, it covers a whole heap of type of different accommodation. In terms of the tenancy itself, there is a responsibility on tenants to ensure in terms of ownership of the tenancy as such that they are on that tenancy, on it for the bond and on it for the tenancy. So in terms of, you know, off the book arrangements, then we're just really clear on advising the different stakeholders in the sector, so the property owner or the property manager or the tenant themselves, on their rights and responsibilities within the Act is the space that we really play. So.
I mean, is there, I'm just thinking, with the way that the housing crisis is going, and, you know, maybe with some more of these informal arrangements that are there, I mean, does the RTA, are you undertaking sort of specific educational sort of campaigns that might, you know, relate to people in informal sort of tenant arrangements?
Definitely. So part of the transformation piece, even though I spoke specifically about tech stack and the customer, we are also underway. One of our approved board projects is around stakeholder engagement and education. We're investing heavily in that over the next couple of years because we see a massive opportunity. You know, you look at the volume, we're like, tens of millions of interactions with customers when you look across every touch point, and we see our role not only as the regulator, and we do enforce the Act, but also in that education and stakeholder space. And that's a two-way street. That is for us to educate, to help people to understand their rights and responsibilities. It's also for us, you were talking about before, listening. I find it is super interesting to go out there and listen to the types of questions and queries that people have. And then that's the double check for us to go, is that accessible? Have we got that on our website? Are we using that in our education campaigns or, you know, future coming social media programs? So, yep.
Great.
And I think I'd just add that, I mean, we talk about renters' rights, but it is renters' rights and responsibilities. And we will often talk to renters about their responsibilities. It's just that they're usually all too aware of their responsibilities and not aware of their rights. I think we are in a unique position at the moment. I have young adult children who probably should have left home by now, and so one could argue that our house is overcrowded. You know, it is a particular moment in time, but from a rental perspective, the legislation guides the proper use of a property, and there are regular inspections that are undertaken. And so from a private tenancy perspective, you know, I think there are some checks and balances there.
I know we had...
I've got the mic.
Oh, I can't see. Where are you? Oh, yeah.
I've got the microphone, so, and I know I'm invisible behind the podium, so I'm just going to leave in. Kia ora, I'm Lucy Tauwha Barnard from the University of Otago in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I just had a comment and a question. So a comment for the gentleman back there in New Zealand. I'd observed we've recently had an increase to our rental housing standards, and there has been no sign of landlord exit from the market. There was a lot of talk about it, but it did not eventuate. My question was around the new requirements for rental standards in Australia, and whether there is any proposal afoot to have any kind of pre-inspection for tenancies so that it's known to be in a good state of repair before the property is rented. And if there's not, do you think that that might preempt some of the inquiries that come later if it's already measured to be in a good state before they move in?
I might not.
Yeah, and
I'll dive in quickly on that one. So a couple of things. I think, you know, great Mark Cridlin question, but from the RTA's perspective, like so if you're talking about the condition of the property before the tenant actually moves in, we have the entry condition report here, which is having just I have just literally entered the rental market myself at the age of 51. That is actually a critical document that documents the condition of the property, any damage to the property, anything that's that needs repair in the property at the entry point so that that discussion can kick off between the tenant and the property manager or the owner and can be remediated, and also too in terms of rights and responsibilities of owners or property managers or tenants upon the exit of that property, that the condition of the property is detailed. I mean, when I got my entry to condition role, I think it was something like 78 pages. Every tiny little thing was documented and there was a photo, and you know, you could, so I don't know whether that's something that you have in New Zealand or? Oh, okay.
So in Victoria, we have a requirement for mandatory disclosure now of certain things. So a very simple one is, has there been any mould in the property, and have there been any repairs done to the mould in the last 3 years? So, you know, there are some other things around that as well, you know, that are a little more sordid that I won't mention here, but it still sits, there's no independent verification of that. The responsibility sits with the landlord or the leasing agent, and then it's again up to the renter if something goes wrong. You know, I have a personal experience of a friend who had a child who was, or young adult child who was living in a house. They moved out because the property was just filled with mould and people were getting sick. But about 6 months later, one of her other children decided to move into the same house, and there was no declaration of the repair mould that had been done. So, you know, that's the next step I think that we need to take. We've been at Tenants Victoria involved with some research, doing some mystery shopping. We haven't finalised the data and published the reports yet, but going into houses in the private rental market and ticking off against some of those minimum standards. So it would be great if some of that could be, you know, become standard practice, that perhaps every 6 months an audit is undertaken randomly of properties that are listed for rent.
And just sort of speaking to that in terms of some of the, you know, sort of where it's been, people have decided to take that up through social media in terms of, you know, naming properties and landlords and letting agencies where, you know, repairs haven't been done or properties are, you know, not habitable. You know, so it's one of my favourite social media accounts called Shit Rentals. Look it up. But it is at that point, you know, where someone's had to, you know, set up a social media account, I think, to really bring to light, you know, the appalling standards that some tenants live in, and, you know, and the fact that there is such a you know, lack of recourse, you know, for some tenants. I know we've got a question right at the top. Yep.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity. The mention of mould was a good segue for me. My name's Pren Dodage, the National Asset Manager for YWCA. As I mentioned, we have a national footprint, but we're mostly based in Victoria. Mould seems, first I'll say I completely support the increase in standards. I think that's a great thing that we're going to. But in terms of mould, I think there's a point where we're not quite there in terms of clarification of responsibility in relation to mould as a result of a structural defect, which I support should be a landlord issue, as opposed to that of what the landlord cannot control. And I was just wondering whether there was going to, or there is, or there will continue to be correspondence around the clarification between those responsibilities, because we often find ourselves, I speak personally, find ourselves being the subject of a complaint with a potential litigious nature to it, of things that aren't within our ability to control, i.e. it's mould that is based on, you know, not being able to ventilate properly, etc., not necessarily a an ingress of moisture from the outside in. So, yeah, I mean, in a roundabout way, is there any information that will clearly clarify that within the tenants' union, or are we going to move towards but clarifying those two responsibilities a little clearer? Thanks.
Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that because there is a line somewhere, but it's a very elastic line, and you know, we know where it's clear, where, you know, if you have a shower and you don't open the window and there's no exhaust fan, mould is likely to grow, and so, you know, open the window, install an exhaust fan. You know, they can be more straightforward, through to some of the you know, problems with building. And Alyce and I were talking about this earlier. We've had people come to us where the mould can't be repaired because the design of the building, or the building of the building, has meant that water continues to pool, and the humidification happens. So there's a challenge in between the structure of the building and how the building's used. And people breathe, they exhale moisture, and therefore the building needs to be able to tolerate that. So we've run a number of information sessions. We've had a number of discussions with academics, with people who are in the business of remediating mould, and we can't find that point of clarity. So I think it is going to be an ongoing conversation that we just keep having. Minimum standards take us some way to addressing it, but there will be, you know, every case has its own set of circumstances and need to be addressed.
Yeah, I'll talk from our organisation, because it is a grey area. It's like, when does it stop being the tenant or the structure? Like, you know, it's not clear, and I don't know if it ever will be, because it's very hard, because there's so many factors within mould and how it grows. So we have a very experienced property officer that will go out and inspect some of these mould circumstances, because if it is structural, 100% we will want to be rectifying those structural issues straight away. But if the tenant disagrees with this, and that does happen, that they will say, no, it's your building, it's not us, you know. So what we do is we go and get an independent person, get a report, and then we work through those recommendations about what it is. Is it that there's no exhaust fan? Have they not opened the window? Whatever it is, we just go and work with that, so we get a little bit of independence in there, because I think it can be hard to negotiate and navigate with the tenant and the organisation, but sometimes a little bit of independence helps.
And just, I mean, this is a little bit of a follow-on, I think, with you saying around independence. One of the online questions is about, you know, maintenance being identified as a major problem, and this person's interested in tools and solutions that, you know, track and monitor leaks and electricity surges, and they've suggested that, so, you know, whether there are some of those sort of tools that are around, like, have you used them, you know, in your properties?
So sometimes those are quite, they can be quite serious, like if you've got a leak or electricity going into waters and leaks and those sorts of things. We would be looking to those experts with those specialised skills to get those reports, because we don't employ people as specialists to go into that level of detail, and we would be getting into some dangerous territory of making that assessment ourselves if we felt that there was a little bit more here. So we would always look for independent advice around those things. So in terms of tools, we would first have a look, like that would be the first stage, have a look, assess, review from our own, and if there was something more going on, then we would probably look for some independent advice around that.
Okay. Do we have any more in the room? Yep,
Oh, yes.
One up here. We'll just get a mic to you.
Thanks, Emma. Peter Mayers from Inside Story magazine. Jennifer, congratulations to Tenants Victoria on the tool, but the repair tool. I have a question. What happens after stage 3? So I have a friend who has a mould issue because the bathroom wasn't properly sealed, etc., etc. She won't take it up because she says other tenants have been to VCAT they get orders and nothing happens. There's no way the tenant can enforce that order. And so I'm wondering, and I'm interested to know about this from the Queensland perspective as well, what happens next once someone's been through all those steps, they've got a VCAT order and still nothing happens?
So let's just acknowledge that we the rental system is broken for many renters, probably for more than we think. So that's our baseline. So what we're trying to do is build up a better experience for renters. In Victoria, with the lockdowns and the impact of COVID, we're still trying to manage a backlog of cases that have been, applications that have been made to VCAT. Some of those are for repairs and maintenance, some of them are for compensation. They're running at like 2 years behind, and there's a process in place to address that. So what happens after VCAT or at VCAT? There is inconsistency of decision making often. There is no enforceability of those orders. So sometimes we have people come back to us who've had orders and they still haven't been done. So we support them to go back to VCAT to get a second lot of orders. I think these are all the next area for reform in Victoria, and that's again, the work that Tenants Victoria does to take the value of the high volume work that we do and make representations to the various decision makers around that. The housing statement that was launched a couple of weeks ago talks about implementing a rental dispute resolution service. We had this during COVID when people were able to ask for rent reductions. It was really successful. 75,000 rent reductions were lodged with Consumer Affairs Victoria, and it's great to see that we're going back to having some sort of tribunal process. We don't know what the detail about that looks like yet, and we're looking forward to working with the government to sharing our insights on that. But yeah, it's kind of a bit of luck involved, and that's really hard for us to look at and to acknowledge, because day after day after day, people come to Tenants Victoria with terrible stories of situations that they find themselves in.
Is there anything you want to add from a Queensland perspective if someone has gone through a process and gone to the tribunal, and if it's still not rectified, what happens then?
Yeah, so coming through to the RTA, so the first port of call, we encourage people to go through the free dispute resolution process, and we often find that great outcomes can occur just by getting parties to talk to each other. It's amazing what a brave conversation can do. Once the conciliation has occurred, we resolve 76% of those, just a little bit over. Really, the party makes the decision at that point. Our role is to, keep those people out of QCAT and support them to resolve. The parties make a decision at that point if they want to take it further to QCAT. There's various courts over Queensland. QCAT can make a ruling. We will be advised if it's particularly something around payment of the bond or distribution of the bond in a particular way. But it doesn't come back to the RTA to kind of administer or really govern as the regulator any order that's been made to...
So if it's a repairs order and it's still gone to the tribunal and the repairs are not done, then there's...
So definitely then come back to us again, come back to the RTA again and help us facilitate those conversations, because it is around the rights and responsibilities of each party as is governed by the Act, and that's what we are really active in, supporting people to understand their roles in both those spheres, depending on which stakeholder they are, and supporting them to get to that good outcome.
I think, just to follow up, people can escalate their concerns to the Supreme Court, but that's no longer timely, accessible, affordable. So very few people do that, and we wouldn't necessarily encourage people to be doing that. But that's the system has that as the next step.
Yep.
And I think, don't quote me if I'm wrong, but also too, like in terms of the application, if that's a really significant matter, that can be an emergency, you know, an application for, you know, an emergency. I don't know whether emergency is the right word, but certainly, you know, an emergency hearing if they want to classify it like that to get that support through QCAT.
Yep. Did you want to
Just from a community housing as well, we are regulated. We're and so there's another level of commitment that we have with our regulators. So for community housing, if there are those complaints, we have our own internal complaints procedure that we would hope that they would come through us if there has been something in our services that has not gone right. But then there is those escalation points for the regulator. So we would expect that some of those complaints might go to the regulator, and then we will look at responding. Our licence is at risk if we have too many of those.
Yep.
So from a community housing provider, that we have commitments to our regulator, so we can't afford to not do it right. You know, so we are much more regulated than private and other landlords.
And I think too, it's really important to remember, and I'll speak specifically for the RTA in Queensland, is that we have our investigations and enforcement division. So if tenants feel like that we have a whole decision-making tree that they can go through on our website to actually define whether they fall into a category where it's, you know, they really want to escalate to us in terms of a breach and an investigation, and we will also offer that service out of our business. We have a dedicated team that are full-time that sit in our business that do that, so they also have that avenue. It isn't just the, you know, go to the dispute resolution. If they feel like there's been a breach, they can talk to our team about an investigation.
Yep.
Yep.
We've got time for one last question. Yep, up the top.
Hello, thanks. I'm in Queensland, so this is the experience I'm talking to, but I think it's applicable across other states, is that currently tenants, particularly in the private market, are scared to exercise their rights because it's so easy to be blacklisted or evicted upon exercising those rights. And I wanted to ask about ways to protect renters, to have a landlord or a real estate have to actually go through some kind of tribunal process to put a renter's name on some kind of blacklist program, because at the moment anyone can just willy-nilly, the real estate can say, yep, we've blacklisted you, and there's no oversight of that. And yet in reverse, we've got landlords who can have an order made for repairs, and then once that tenant goes, I think this was kind of brought up before, there's no proof. They don't have to show that they've made a repair, and so consecutive tenants can be making the same repair orders, getting the repair order, and then getting evicted, and then, you know, that property remains. So we've got this imbalance where renters get blacklisted without any oversight. Landlords can go through a tribunal, but then you know, that problem remains. So yeah, if you have any thoughts about how you could support that.
I think we might just stick to the tenant database question. I think the one around landlords, hear you completely, and I think in terms of the ongoing work that we're probably all doing around advocacy, I think is something, you know, it is that next step of like, how do you continue to make property owners accountable and that process. But I just wonder if there's anything you wanted to add around, you know, the process of like, maybe in Queensland of getting tenants being put on tenant databases. You know, do you have any?
Look, that's not something the RTA administers, because that is sort of a process that happens in the pre-application process for the property before they land the bond with us. But I think it's a really interesting question in terms of how there are some frameworks put in place for how, you know, a tenant would potentially get become blacklisted, and what would be the framework and requirements to actually meet that, you know what I mean? I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it would be a good discussion to talk about in terms of balancing the balance of power, where that would sit and how that would happen. Like, is that actually a regulation activity? And in which case, where does that sit? Because that actually sits, I suppose, even pre the commercial agreement between the tenant and the property owner or manager in the application process. So I think it's a really good question, because it is that imbalance of power, and you do have the two sides of those things happening. So where do they sit? I don't know if you've got any more.
Yeah, so in Victoria, we had 132 changes to the Residential Tenancies Act in 2021, and it addressed some of these concerns. So some people are not able to be added to tenant databases anymore. So if there's a family violence element to it, then they're not to be added. We do have provision for landlords to be blacklisted now. There are a number of reasons that are allowable for leases to be terminated by a landlord. So, in terms of the framework, I think in Victoria it's sitting there. How that gets realised takes time. And I think the first thing is renters need to know their rights, and our experience is renters don't know their rights, and therefore they're unable to exercise them. So they just instead put a wish out there and hope that things could be better. Well, actually, things are starting to get better around the country, and so I'd encourage renters, encourage you to encourage renters to understand what their rights are in each state, so that they can, with knowledge and information, begin to exercise those.
It is that knowledge of understanding not only your responsibilities but also your rights is so key. I mean, in our business, I sit out on the floor sometimes, often in the middle of the call centre, and what you hear all day, it's interesting to hear calls or inquiries wrap up with, kind of, wow, okay, I'm really clear on what rights I have and what my next step is, but it's actually getting to the source of the information and getting the right information to understand your rights, which is, kind of where we play definitively around, the legislation.
And I'm just going to make one comment, and then we've got to go for lunch. But I feel like a big sense of back to the future with that question, because, I think it was around 15 years ago in Queensland, there was, under Minister Schwarten at that time, there was all this stuff around tenant databases, and I had thought that the legislation had addressed that, but obviously my brain doesn't remember that as clearly as, so I'm probably keen to actually talk to you about that a bit more if you're wanting to. But we have reached lunchtime, so it is lunch in the exhibition hall. We're back all in here in an hour at 1:15. But thank you so much for your questions and for being in this session today. And I'd just like to thank our panellists here. So thank you.